Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is right now. It was the summer of 1987, and I was 10 years old, teetering on that awkward edge between childhood innocence and the first hints of self-awareness. My family had driven out to the county fair in our old station wagon, the kind with fake wood paneling that peeled at the edges. My parents, Mom with her permed hair and Dad in his faded denim shirt, were excited about the outing. It was meant to be a treat, a break from the monotony of our small-town life in rural Ohio. My younger cousin Tommy was with us that day. He was only 6, a bundle of energy with curly brown hair and a gap-toothed grin that could melt anyone's heart. Tommy's parents were going through a rough patch, so he often stayed with us. And I loved playing the role of the big, protective cousin. The fairgrounds were alive with the kind of chaos that thrills a kid. The sharp scent of cotton candy and fried dough mingling with the earthy smell of livestock from the barns nearby. Rides whirred and clanked, lights flashed in a dizzying array of colors, and the air was filled with laughter, screams, and the tinny music from the carousel. Tommy and I had begged to go on the Ferris wheel. It was the tallest thing there, a rickety metal giant that promised views of the entire fair and maybe even the twinkling lights of town beyond the fields. My parents agreed, handing us tickets they'd bought from a booth manned by a grizzled old guy with a cigarette dangling from his lips. We joined the line, which snaked back and forth under strings of bare bulbs. Tommy clutched my hand tightly, his palm sweaty and small in mine. He was chattering away about how high we'd go, imagining we could touch the clouds. I remember feeling a surge of responsibility. Mom had told me to keep an eye on him, and I took it seriously. The line moved slowly, people shuffling forward in groups of 2 or 3. Families, couples, groups of teenagers giggling and shoving each other. I spotted a man in a plaid shirt a few spots ahead. Nothing unusual, just another fairgoer in the crowd. Then it happened. A chill wind picked up, rustling the banners overhead, and I felt a shiver. I let go of Tommy's hand for just a second to zip up my jacket. It was one of those cheap windbreakers with a hood that never stayed on right. In that blink, that infinitesimal moment, he was gone. I turned back, expecting to see him right there, maybe bending down to tie his shoe or staring at a passing clown. But the space beside me was empty. My heart lurched. "Tommy!" I called out, my voice small at first, then louder. "Tommy!" Panic set in like a wave crashing over me. I spun around, scanning the crowd. People were still chatting, oblivious. My parents were a few steps behind us in line, talking to each other about dinner plans. I bolted to them, tugging at Mom's sleeve. "Tommy's gone. I can't find him." What followed was a blur of terror. Mom's face went white. Dad started shouting Tommy's name. The line dissolved into confusion as people realized something was wrong. Security guards, burly guys in yellow vests, appeared out of nowhere, radios crackling. They asked me questions. What was he wearing? Blue jeans, a red striped shirt, white sneakers. How tall? About this high, I gestured. The cops arrived soon after, their sirens cutting through the fair's noise like a knife. They cordoned off the area around the Ferris wheel, but the fair was massive. Tents, rides, food stalls stretching out in every direction. Witnesses started coming forward. A woman with a stroller said she'd seen a man in a plaid shirt holding a boy's hand, walking briskly toward the parking lot. She thought it was a dad hurrying his kid along. Nothing suspicious until the alarms went up. An older couple mentioned the same man, describing him as mid-30s, average build, with a baseball cap pulled low. The fairgrounds shut down early that night. Lights dimmed, rides ground to a halt. Police dogs sniffed around. Helicopters thumped overhead with spotlights sweeping the fields. My family was ushered to a makeshift command center in one of the admin trailers, where officers took statements. I sat there, numb, replaying that moment in my head. The slip of his hand, the zip of my jacket. Guilt gnawed at me like a physical pain. If only I'd held on tighter. The search dragged on through the night and into the next day. Flyers with Tommy's school photo, that goofy smile, were plastered everywhere. On telephone poles, in store windows, even handed out at gas stations along the highway. The local news picked it up, turning our nightmare into a headline. Child vanishes from county fair. Strangers called with tips, most of them useless. My aunt and uncle arrived, devastated. They blamed my parents at first, then me, then themselves, in a cycle of grief that tore everyone apart. Family dinners became silent affairs, punctuated by sobs. I stopped sleeping, haunted by dreams where I reached for Tommy but grasped only air. Weeks turned into months. The investigation hit dead ends. The man in the plaid shirt was never identified. No clear footage from the fair's grainy security cameras, no matching descriptions in missing persons databases. Rumors swirled. Human trafficking rings preying on carnivals, or maybe a custody dispute we didn't know about. But nothing concrete. My parents aged overnight. Dad took to drinking. Mom withdrew into herself. I threw myself into school, trying to escape the whispers from classmates. That's the kid who lost his cousin. Then, almost a year later, a break. A detective following up on a cold lead in a neighboring state got a call from a social worker. A boy matching Tommy's description had been found living with a couple in a trailer park outside Indianapolis. The man, yes, the one in the plaid shirt, had a history of petty crimes and a delusional belief that the boy was his own son, lost years ago in a custody battle that never happened. He'd snatched Tommy on impulse, convinced it was fate. The woman he lived with had gone along with it, too scared or complicit to report it. Tommy was alive, malnourished, scared, but alive. The reunion was bittersweet. Tears, hugs, questions no one could fully answer. He'd been told we didn't want him anymore. A cruel lie that took therapy to unravel. The abductor was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 25 years for kidnapping. His accomplice got a lighter sentence for cooperating. Life didn't snap back to normal, but it mended piece by piece. Tommy grew up resilient, though he carried scars, nightmares, trust issues. We stayed close. He's like a brother now, with kids of his own. My family healed through counseling and time, learning to talk about the pain instead of burying it. I still think about that day sometimes, especially at fairs or when I see a Ferris wheel lit up at night. It reminds me how fragile things are, how a split second can change everything. But it also reminds me of hope. That even in the darkest moments, closure can come, and families can rebuild. It was the summer of 2008, and I was 17, stuck in that awkward phase between high school and whatever came next. To make some extra cash, I'd taken a job at the annual county fair in Millfield, Ohio, a small town where everyone knew everyone. And the biggest excitement was the midway lights flickering against the humid evening sky. I was manning the funnel cake stand, a greasy little booth wedged between the tilt-a-whirl and the ring toss games. The air was thick with the smell of powdered sugar, fried dough, and that faint undercurrent of diesel from the generators powering the rides. My shifts were long, from noon until the crowds thinned out around midnight. But it beat flipping burgers at the local diner. That particular evening, around 7:30, the sun was dipping low, casting everything in that golden hour glow that made the fair feel almost magical. A family strolled up to the counter. A mom in her mid-30s with a tired smile, wearing a faded Buckeyes t-shirt. A dad who looked like he'd just come from a construction site, with calloused hands and a baseball cap pulled low. And their little girl, who couldn't have been more than 6 or 7. She was the one who stuck in my mind right away. She had this bright yellow dress on, dotted with tiny embroidered sunflowers that matched her bouncy blonde pigtails. Her eyes lit up when she saw the menu board, and she tugged at her dad's sleeve, pointing excitedly at the funnel cake options. "Can we get the one with strawberries, Daddy? Please," she asked, her voice high and sweet, like kids get when they're hyped up on fairground energy. The dad chuckled and ordered a large one with extra powdered sugar and strawberries on top. I remember chatting with them a bit while I poured the batter into the fryer. Small talk about the heat wave we'd been having and how the Ferris wheel line was always too long. The mom handed over a $10 bill, and I gave them their change along with a steaming plate of fried goodness. The girl grinned up at me as they walked away, her face already dusted with sugar from sneaking a bite. They melted back into the crowd, heading toward the game booths, I figured. About 20 minutes later, as I was wiping down the counter during a lull, the dad came sprinting back, his face flushed and sweaty, eyes wide with panic. He was alone, no mom or daughter in sight. "Have you seen my little girl?" he gasped, leaning over the counter like he might vault it. "She was right here with us. Yellow dress, sunflowers on it. Blonde hair. She just vanished." My stomach dropped. I'd seen plenty of lost kids at the fair, toddlers wandering off toward the petting zoo or teens ditching their parents for the arcade. But something about his tone sent a chill through me despite the warm night. I shook my head, scanning the area around the booth. "No, sir, not since you all left. Let me check with my coworker." I yelled back to Jenny, who was handling the deep fryer, but she hadn't seen anything either. The dad was already pulling out his phone, dialing frantically, muttering about how they'd turned around for just a second to buy cotton candy. And poof, she was gone. We radioed security right away. The fairgrounds weren't massive, maybe 10 acres tops, with chain-link fences around the perimeter and only a few monitored exits. But in the chaos of spinning rides, blaring music, and hundreds of people milling about, it felt like a labyrinth. Announcements crackled over the loudspeakers. "Attention, fairgoers. We're looking for a missing child, approximately 6 years old, blonde hair, wearing a yellow dress with sunflowers. If you've seen her, please report to the nearest security booth." They even shut down the rides temporarily to make it easier to search, which caused a ripple of grumbles from the crowd, but also got everyone looking. The mom showed up a minute later, tears streaming down her face, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. She described the girl in more detail. Her name was Emily. She had a small birthmark on her left cheek. and she'd been carrying a stuffed bunny she'd won earlier at the dart game. Security fanned out, checking under trailers, behind booths, even in the porta potties. I stuck around after my shift ended, helping where I could, handing out water to the search teams, and keeping an eye on the funnel cake stand in case she wandered back. By 9 p.m., the police had arrived. Local deputies from the sheriff's office, lights flashing but no sirens to avoid spooking the crowd further. They took statements from us, from the parents, from anyone who'd been nearby. Flyers were printed up on the spot at the fair office. Emily's photo, pulled from the mom's phone, her description, and a hotline number. They plastered them on every pole and gate. The parents were distraught, the dad pacing, the mom sitting on a bench, rocking back and forth, whispering prayers. I felt helpless, replaying that brief interaction in my head, wondering if I'd missed some clue. The search dragged on into the night. Volunteers from town joined in, combing the parking lots and the wooded area just beyond the fairgrounds. Rumors started swirling. Someone thought they'd seen a girl matching her description near the exit. Another claimed a suspicious van had peeled out earlier. But nothing panned out. As the fair wound down and the lights dimmed, I headed home, my mind racing. That sunflower dress haunted my dreams for weeks. I'd wake up sweating, picturing her lost in the shadows. The next morning, the story was all over the local news. Search parties expanded. K-9 units were brought in. And the FBI even got looped in because of the interstate nearby. Flyers spread to gas stations and diners across the county. I went back to the fair every day that week, not just for work, but to check in, hoping for good news. It came about 3 days later, in a way no one expected. Turns out, Emily hadn't been abducted or wandered far. She'd gotten scared by the crowd noise after her parents turned away at the cotton candy stand and had hidden in the back of an empty game trailer, curling up with her bunny and falling asleep amid the stuffed prizes. The trailer belonged to a vendor who'd packed up early that night due to a family emergency and driven it straight home to a farm about 15 miles away, unaware of the stowaway. When he opened it the next morning to unload, there she was, groggy and hungry, but otherwise unharmed. He'd called the police immediately, and after a quick medical check, she was reunited with her parents at the station. The relief was palpable. The fair organizers held a little press conference, praising the community effort. And Emily's family stopped by the funnel cake stand a week later to thank me personally. She was shy, but gave me a hug, still in that yellow dress, now a bit rumpled from the ordeal. Her dad shook my hand, his eyes misty. "You were the last one to see her happy before it all went sideways," he said. "Means a lot that you remembered her so clearly." Looking back, it was a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong in a place that's supposed to be all fun and games, but also how they can turn out okay with persistence and a bit of luck. Millfield's fair added more security measures after that. Extra cameras, child wristbands with GPS. But for me, it was the end of my carnival days. I finished out the summer and headed off to college that fall, carrying the story as a cautionary tale rather than a nightmare. Emily's probably in her 20s now, maybe with kids of her own. And I hope that sunflower dress is just a fond memory for her, not a shadow. When I was 19, fresh out of high school and trying to be the cool big sister, I decided to take my little brother, Tommy, to the local carnival for his 8th birthday. It was one of those classic summer setups in our small town. Faded red and white striped tents, the smell of cotton candy and fried dough wafting through the air, and the constant hum of rides creaking and spinning. Tommy was obsessed with everything there, but what he begged for most was the Mirror Maze Funhouse. "Please, sis, it's like a puzzle but with magic mirrors," he pleaded, his eyes wide with that innocent excitement kids have before the world gets too complicated. I rolled my eyes, but caved, buying our tickets from a bored attendant who barely looked up from his phone. The funhouse was tucked away at the edge of the midway, its entrance framed by garish clown faces painted on weathered wood, promising endless reflections and thrills. We stepped inside, and immediately the world twisted. The mirrors stretched floor to ceiling, some convex, some concave, turning our bodies into stretched-out giants or squished dwarfs. Tommy laughed hysterically, darting ahead and pressing his palms against the glass, leaving smudgy fingerprints everywhere. I followed close behind, calling out, "Slow down, buddy. Don't get too far ahead." But mirror mazes are designed to confuse, aren't they? One wrong turn, and suddenly I was staring at a dozen versions of myself, each one looking more lost than the last. The lights were dim, flickering fluorescents that cast eerie shadows, and the air felt stuffy, like it hadn't been ventilated in years. I could hear Tommy's giggles echoing from somewhere nearby. Or was it far? Sound bounced off the mirrors just like the light did, making it impossible to pinpoint. "Tommy? Where are you?" I called, my voice cracking a bit with the first hint of worry. He didn't answer right away, but then I heard another laugh, not his high-pitched, bubbly one. This was deeper, lower, almost a chuckle that sent a chill up my spine. It didn't belong in there, not with us. I spun around, my heart picking up speed, and that's when I saw him. A man stepped out from behind one of the mirror partitions, like he'd been lurking just out of sight. He was tall, maybe in his 40s, with a scruffy beard and clothes that looked too worn for a casual carnival goer. A faded denim jacket over a stained shirt, jeans that had seen better days. In one hand, he held a single red balloon, its string dangling loosely. His grin was wide, too wide, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. His eyes locked onto mine in the reflection first, then directly as he turned. "Lost," he said, his voice gravelly, but I didn't respond. Or something about him felt off. Why was he alone in here, not with a kid or a group? And that balloon, it just hung there, bobbing slightly. Panic hit me like a wave. I whipped around, scanning the mirrors frantically until I spotted Tommy's small figure a few panels away, oblivious, still giggling at his distorted reflection. I lunged forward, bumping into glass more than once, the impacts jarring my shoulders. "Tommy, come here now!" I grabbed his hand, thank God he was right there, and yanked him toward what I hoped was the way out. He protested, "Hey, what's wrong? I was having fun." But I didn't stop. My mind was racing. Was that guy following us? Was he some creep preying on kids? We stumbled through a couple more turns until I saw the red glow of an emergency exit sign. I shoved the door open, and we burst out into the bright afternoon sunlight, the carnival noise rushing back like a lifeline. I glanced back through the closing door, heart pounding, but the man was gone. No sign of him in the mirrors, no footsteps echoing. Tommy was confused, tugging at my sleeve. Why'd we leave? That was awesome. I forced a smile, but inside I was shaken. We headed straight to the Carnival's info booth, where a couple of staff members in polo shirts were chatting. I breathlessly explained what happened. The lost kid, the weird laugh, the man with the balloon. They listened, but their reactions were dismissive. "Probably just another guest," one said, shrugging. "People get turned around in there all the time. And yeah, we have folks who like to hang out and scare others for fun, harmless pranks." The other checked a walkie-talkie and radioed someone inside the funhouse, but came back with, "No one matching that description in there now. You sure it wasn't a reflection or something?" I wasn't convinced, but what could I do? Tommy was already eyeing the Ferris wheel, his scare forgotten in seconds. I reported it to the local police booth at the Carnival entrance anyway, just in case. The officer took my statement seriously enough, noting the details and promising to keep an eye out. "We've had reports of oddballs before," he admitted, "but nothing's ever come of it. Could have been a homeless guy sneaking in for shelter, or maybe even one of the carnies on break." He suggested we stick to the open areas and head home if we felt uneasy. In the end, nothing more came of it. We rode a few more rides, ate some overpriced popcorn, and called it a day. Tommy chattered about the mirrors all the way home, turning the whole thing into an adventure story for Mom and Dad. As for me, I couldn't shake the unease for a while. I avoided carnivals for years after that. But looking back now, with the perspective of time, I realize it was probably just a weird coincidence. Maybe the guy was lost himself, or socially awkward, holding that balloon for a kid he was with earlier. Carnivals attract all kinds. Not everyone's a monster. It taught me to trust my instincts, though. Better to overreact and be safe than ignore that gut feeling. Tommy's 23 now, and we still joke about the creepy balloon man. But it's more of a funny anecdote than a nightmare. Life goes on, and sometimes the scariest moments are just shadows in the mirror. I remember that summer like it was yesterday, even though it's been over a decade now. I was 14, awkward and full of that teenage invincibility that makes you think nothing bad can happen on a sunny day at the county fair. It was one of those annual events in our small town. Dusty midway lined with game booths, the air thick with the smell of fried dough, cotton candy, and livestock from the barns nearby. My friends and I, there were 4 of us, all from the same middle school clique, had begged our parents for money to spend the whole afternoon there, riding everything we could and stuffing our faces with junk food. We'd already tackled the Ferris wheel and a rickety roller coaster that left us giggling and dizzy. That's when we spotted the Gravitron, or whatever they called it at that fair. It was this big, circular ride, like a giant spinning drum, painted in faded reds and blues, with flashing lights and a sign promising, "Feel the force." You stand against the padded walls inside, no seats or anything, and as it spins faster and faster, the centrifugal force pins you in place. Then the floor drops out, leaving you stuck there like a bug on flypaper. It sounded thrilling, the kind of thing that would make for a great story later. My friends were hyped, chanting, "Let's do it," as we handed over our tickets and filed into the queue. The operator was this guy in his late 20s, maybe early 30s, with greasy hair under a baseball cap and a stained fair uniform that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. He barely glanced at the group ahead of us as he herded them in. But when it was our turn, I caught him looking at me a little too long. His eyes lingered, not in a friendly way, but with this odd intensity that made my stomach twist. I shrugged it off. Maybe he was just bored, or I reminded him of someone. We squeezed into the ride, backs against the cool vinyl panels, and he went around checking the restraints. These metal bars that locked over your shoulders and waist to keep you secure until the spin took over. The door sealed shut with a hydraulic hiss, and the ride hummed to life. Music blared, some cheesy rock track, and the chamber started rotating, slowly at first, building speed. The force pushed against me, flattening my body to the wall as the floor retracted with a mechanical groan. It was exhilarating at first, the world blurring into streaks of color, my hair whipping around my face. But through the centrifugal haze, I kept noticing the operator. He was visible through the small window in the control booth, and he wasn't watching the ride as a whole. His gaze was fixed right on me, unblinking, like he was studying my reactions. It creeped me out, but I was too busy trying not to laugh or scream to dwell on it. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a couple of minutes, the ride began to slow. The floor rose back up, and one by one, the restraints clicked open with a satisfying pop. My friends started shuffling out, chattering excitedly about how awesome it was, but mine didn't release. I tugged at the bar, pushed the release button. Nothing. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the now still chamber. "It's stuck! I can't get out!" The operator was right there, just outside the door, but he didn't move. He leaned against the control panel, arms crossed, and this smirk crept across his face, like he was enjoying a private joke. My heart started pounding. "Please, let me out!" I yelled louder, panic rising as the other riders filed past him, oblivious. My friends noticed then, hovering at the exit, calling out, "What's wrong? Come on!" Instead of helping, he flipped a switch. The ride lurched back to life, the doors slamming shut again. The spinning resumed, faster this time, without the gradual build-up. I was slammed against the wall, the force crushing my chest, making it hard to draw breath. My arms were pinned awkwardly from trying to free myself earlier, and every rotation felt like a punch to my ribs. Tears stung my eyes as I gasped, the world tilting and blurring. "Stop! Please stop!" I screamed. But the music drowned me out, and the G-forces made it impossible to yell coherently. Bruises were forming where the restraint dug in, and my legs burned from the strain. Outside, my friends freaked out. One of them, Sarah, the boldest in our group, bolted for the main fair office, dodging crowds and shouting for help. The others banged on the ride's exterior, yelling at the operator, but he just stood there, that smirk still plastered on his face, pretending not to hear over the noise. It couldn't have been more than a minute or two, but it felt like hours before help arrived. A burly supervisor from the fair rushed over with a couple of other workers, alerted by Sarah's frantic pleas. They shoved the operator aside and hit the emergency stop. The ride ground to a halt with a screech, the floor rising unevenly. My restraint finally popped open. Turns out it had a manual override the operator could have used all along. I stumbled out, legs like jelly, sobbing and clutching my sides where purple welts were already blooming under my shirt. My friends wrapped their arms around me, helping me to a nearby bench while the supervisor grilled the operator. He played it off as an accident, mumbling something about a glitch in the system and how he thought restarting it would reset the locks. But I saw the way his eyes flicked to me one last time as they led him away. That same cold smile, like he'd gotten away with something. The fair staff comped us free tickets for the rest of the day and even called my parents, who picked me up early. The bruises faded in a week or so, but the fear stuck with me longer. We reported it to the fair organizers, and I heard later that the guy was fired, though nothing ever came of it legally. No proof it was intentional, just a malfunction on record. Looking back, I think he was just a bully with a little power, getting his kicks from scaring a kid. It taught me to trust my gut about people, and I've been cautious around carnival rides ever since. That was the last time I set foot in that county fair. Too many bad memories spinning around in my head. When I think back to that summer in my early 20s, it still sends a chill down my spine. Not because of some lingering mystery that haunts me like in the movies, but because it was one of those real-life moments where you realize how close you can come to something truly awful without even knowing it. I was fresh out of community college, scraping by on odd jobs, and a buddy of mine talked me into joining a traveling carnival crew for the season. It sounded like an adventure, hopping from small town to small town across the Midwest, setting up rides, manning game booths, and tearing it all down under the stars. The pay was lousy, but the freedom felt good. Until that one night in late July in a dusty fairground outside of Des Moines, Iowa. We'd had a packed evening. The carnival was in full swing, the Ferris wheel spinning lazily against the twilight sky, kids screaming on the tilt-a-whirl, the air thick with the smell of cotton candy, popcorn, and that metallic tang of overheating machinery. I was on the ring toss booth, hawking stuffed animals to wide-eyed families and flirting with the occasional group of high schoolers. By closing time, around 11 p.m., my feet were aching, and all I wanted was to grab my keys from the trailer, hop in my beat-up Honda Civic, and crash at the motel we were all crammed into. The employee parking area was behind the main rides, a gravel lot fenced off from the public with chain link and a couple of staff-only signs that nobody really enforced. It was dimly lit by a few sodium lamps that buzzed like angry hornets, casting long shadows over the trucks and vans we used to haul equipment. As I trudged through the lot, kicking up dust with my sneakers, I noticed this white panel van parked awkwardly at the far end, half hidden behind the generator trailer for the bumper cars. It wasn't one of ours. I knew all the crew vehicles by then, from the boss's flashy RV to the rusted pickups the ride operators drove. This one was plain, no logos, just a generic Ford Econoline with tinted windows and a dented rear bumper. It struck me as odd, but carnivals attract all kinds of stragglers, so I didn't think much of it at first. As I got closer, maybe 20 feet away, I heard something that made me pause. Low whispering coming from inside the van. It was muffled, like voices arguing in hushed tones, but urgent. The side sliding door was cracked open just a few inches, enough to let out a sliver of light from what must have been a flashlight or phone screen inside. I slowed my steps, curiosity mixing with that instinctive wariness you get in isolated places at night. That's when it happened. A sharp tap on the inside of the door, like knuckles rapping against metal. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the quiet. Then, a woman's voice, soft and desperate. "Help me." My heart jumped into my throat. I froze for a second, processing what I'd just heard. Was it a joke? Some crew members messing around? But the tone was all wrong. There was real fear in it, a plea that didn't sound playful. Before I could even open my mouth to say something, the door slammed shut with a heavy thud. The engine roared to life, headlights flashing on and blinding me for a moment. Tires spun on the gravel, kicking up a cloud of dust, and the van peeled out of the lot, fishtailing as it hit the access road. I caught a glimpse of the driver through the window. Just a silhouette, a guy with a baseball cap pulled low, but nothing identifiable. No license plate that I could make out in the dark. I stood there dumbfounded for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. The carnival music had long since stopped, but the echoes of laughter and screams from earlier still rang in my ears. Shaking myself out of it, I bolted back toward the main area, yelling for security. We had a couple of off-duty cops moonlighting as guards that night. Big guys named Mike and Terry who'd become friendly with the crew over beers after shifts. They came running, radios crackling, and I spilled the whole thing. The van, the whispers, the voice, the getaway. Mike grabbed his flashlight and checked the spot where the van had been, but there was nothing. No tire tracks that stood out, no dropped items, just the usual litter of cigarette butts and candy wrappers. They called it in right away. Local police showed up within 15 minutes, blue lights flashing silently across the empty fairground. I gave my statement to a detective, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, who jotted everything down on a notepad while sipping coffee from a thermos. She asked all the right questions. What did the van look like exactly? Any distinguishing marks? How many voices did I hear? Did the woman sound injured? I described it as best I could, but details were fuzzy in the adrenaline haze. They dusted the area for prints, but it was a public lot. Hundreds of people tromped through there daily. The crew got questioned too. Nobody else had seen anything unusual, though one of the food vendors mentioned spotting a similar van circling the perimeter earlier in the evening. The investigation didn't drag on like in TV shows. By morning, the cops had run checks on recent reports of missing persons or suspicious vehicles in the area. Turns out, there had been a domestic dispute call a few towns over the day before. A woman had fled her abusive boyfriend who drove a white van matching my description. They pieced it together. He'd likely tracked her to the carnival, maybe coerced her into the vehicle somehow amid the crowds. Security footage from a nearby gas station caught the van on camera later that night, and state troopers pulled it over on the interstate around 2 a.m. The woman was inside, scared but unharmed. Turns out she'd been too frightened to scream earlier, but my walking by gave her a brief window to try for help. The boyfriend was arrested for kidnapping and assault. Last I heard, he pled guilty and got a few years behind bars. We packed up and moved to the next town the following day, as scheduled. The carnival life doesn't pause for drama. I stuck with the job through the end of summer, but I was more vigilant after that. Always walked with a buddy at night, kept an eye on unfamiliar vehicles. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't just ignore it or convince myself it was nothing. It wasn't some grand conspiracy or unsolved horror. It was just a sad, all too common case of domestic violence that could have ended worse. But in that moment, when I heard her voice, it felt like the whole world narrowed to that cracked door. I still wonder sometimes what might have happened if I hadn't been there. But mostly, I'm relieved it turned out okay. Life moved on, and so did I. Back to a steady job, away from the lights and the midway. It was back in the summer of 2015, during our town's annual county fair. The kind of event that draws folks from all over the region with its fried foods, livestock shows, and rickety carnival rides. I was working as a volunteer that year, helping out with the cleanup crew on the last night. The fairgrounds were buzzing with the usual chaos. Kids screaming on the Ferris wheel, the smell of cotton candy mixing with hay and animal pens. But by closing time, things had wound down, and we were just going around making sure everything was secured before the big teardown. One of the workers, a guy named Mike, who'd been handling the porta potties all week, came over to the group of us with a wrinkled nose. "Hey, you smell that?" he said, pointing to one of the units at the edge of the lot. It was a standard blue plastic box, the kind you see at every outdoor event. But this one had been locked from the inside all day. No one had thought much of it earlier. People locked them for privacy, after all. But now, with the fair emptying out, the stench was overpowering. It wasn't the usual sewage smell. It was something sharper, more rotten, like death itself had taken up residence. Mike radioed the fair manager, and a couple of us grabbed tools to force the door. We pried it open with a crowbar, and that's when the horror hit us. Slumped on the seat inside was the body of a man, fully clothed, his head lolled to one side. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s, with short-cropped brown hair going gray at the temples. Wearing a plain white t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers that still had that fresh-out-of-the-box shine. No blood, no obvious signs of violence. Just a lifeless form in a place no one should ever end up like that. The air was thick with flies, and we all backed away, gagging. The police arrived within minutes, sirens cutting through the night. They cordoned off the area, and the fairgrounds turned from festive to forensic. The man had no wallet, no phone, no ID of any kind. His pockets were empty except for a crumpled napkin and a few coins. But what stuck out were the fresh Carnival ride wristbands on his arm, the kind you buy at the gate for unlimited access. They were dated for that very day, and they looked brand new, like he'd just slapped them on hours earlier. His clothes were clean too, no dirt or stains that screamed homeless drifter. He didn't fit the profile of someone down on their luck. If anything, he seemed like an average fairgoer who'd wandered in for some fun. The story exploded in the local news the next morning. "Mystery man found dead in fairground porta potty," the headlines blared. They released a photo of his face, clean-shaven, unremarkable. The kind of guy you'd pass in the grocery store without a second glance. Appeals went out on TV, radio, and even social media, asking if anyone recognized him. Tips poured in, but nothing panned out. Some folks speculated he was a transient passing through, maybe hitched a ride to the fair for a meal or shelter. Others whispered darker theories, foul play, a drug overdose, or even some twisted prank gone wrong. The autopsy came back inconclusive at first. No drugs in his system, no alcohol, no signs of trauma. The coroner noted the heat inside the porta potty could have accelerated decomposition, making it hard to pinpoint the exact time of death. But it seemed he'd been in there since early afternoon. Weeks turned into months, and the case grew cold. Our town isn't big, about 20,000 people, so something like this lingered in conversations at diners and barbershops. I remember feeling uneasy every time I drove past the fairgrounds, wondering about the man's story. Who was he? Did he have family worrying about him somewhere? The police dug deeper, checking missing persons reports from neighboring states, but nothing matched. They even canvassed the fair vendors and ride operators, showing his photo around. A few people vaguely recalled seeing someone like him buying tickets or grabbing a corn dog, but no solid leads. Then, about 6 months later, a breakthrough came from an unexpected place: genealogy. The police had submitted his DNA to one of those public databases, the kind people use to trace their ancestry. It wasn't an instant hit, but a distant cousin in Ohio got a notification about a potential family match. She reached out, puzzled, and provided details that started piecing it together. Turns out, the man was named Robert Harlan, 48 years old, from a small town about 200 miles away. He wasn't homeless. He was a mechanic at an auto shop, divorced with no kids, living a quiet life. His ex-wife confirmed it when shown the photo. She hadn't heard from him in years, but recognized him immediately. Robert had driven to the fair on a whim, one tartaz, telling a co-worker he needed a day off to clear his head. He'd been dealing with undiagnosed heart issues, high blood pressure and arrhythmia that he'd ignored for too long. The coroner revisited the autopsy with this new info and concluded it was a massive heart attack. In the sweltering heat of the porta potty, temperatures inside those things can hit over 100 degrees on a summer day. He'd felt the chest pains coming on, ducked in for what he thought was a quick relief or maybe to sit down, and locked the door behind him. But the attack hit full force, and he collapsed, unable to call for help. No one heard any cries over the fair's noise, and the lock kept curious folks out until it was too late. Why no ID? Robert had a habit of leaving his wallet in his car when at events like this. Didn't want to risk losing it on rides. His vehicle was found a week after the discovery, parked in an overflow lot a mile away, towed as abandoned. Inside were his wallet, phone, dead battery, and a half-eaten bag of fair popcorn. It all added up. A tragic accident, not a mystery or murder. The town held a small memorial once he was identified, and his remains were sent back to Ohio for burial. It brought some closure, reminding us how fragile life can be amid the everyday hustle. These days, the fair still happens every year, but they've added more checks on the facilities and even some emergency buttons inside. Robert's story faded from the headlines, but it's a quiet lesson in our community. Sometimes the scariest things aren't horrors at all, just ordinary bad luck striking at the wrong moment. When I look back on my high school days, one memory stands out like a sore thumb. Not because it was fun or exciting, but because it was so damn unsettling at the time. My best friend back then was this guy named Alex, and we were inseparable. We'd hang out after school, play video games, sneak into movies, the usual teenage stuff. Alex had an older brother, Mike, who was 19 and just out of high school himself. Mike was the kind of guy everyone liked. Tall, easygoing, with a quick laugh and a knack for fixing things. He wasn't the academic type. He preferred working with his hands, and that summer after his graduation, he was itching to get out of our small town in upstate New York. Our hometown was one of those places where nothing much happened. Cornfields, a rundown mall, and the annual county fair that felt like the highlight of the year. Mike had always talked about traveling, seeing the country beyond our little bubble. So when a traveling carnival rolled into town that June, the kind with rickety Ferris wheels, cotton candy stands, and games that were probably rigged, he jumped at the chance for a job. It was called Wanderlust Wonders, or something cheesy like that. A mid-sized operation that hopped from state fair to county festival across the Midwest and Northeast. Mike applied on the spot, chatting up the manager, a grizzled guy named Earl, who looked like he'd been on the road for decades. They hired him as a booth operator for the ring toss game. We all went to the fair that weekend to support him. I remember watching him work, grinning as he handed out stuffed animals to kids who somehow managed to land a ring on a bottle. He looked happy, free, like he'd finally found his ticket out. He packed up his beat-up duffel bag with clothes, his favorite baseball cap, and a few bucks he'd saved from odd jobs. Alex and I helped him load it into the Carnival's trailer. Mike promised to call home every few days, send postcards from wherever they stopped next. His parents were a bit worried, his mom especially, fussing over him like he was still a kid. But they were proud too. "Be safe, Mikey," his dad said, clapping him on the back. And just like that, the Carnival packed up and left town, heading west toward Ohio. For the first couple of weeks, everything seemed fine. Mike called home twice, once from a truck stop in Pennsylvania, where he joked about the bad diner food, and again from some fairground in Indiana, talking about how the crew was like a big, dysfunctional family. He sounded pumped, full of stories about late-night bonfires and weird characters he'd met, like the tattooed strongman who could bend rebar or the fortune teller who claimed she could read palms, but mostly just scammed tourists. Alex related all to me, and we laughed about how Mike was probably living it up, maybe even meeting girls at the stops. Then the calls stopped. At first, no one thought much of it. Cell service on the road could be spotty, right? But a week turned into 2, and Alex's mom started getting anxious. She tried his phone, left voicemails, but it went straight to a generic message after a while, like the battery had died or the service was cut. They checked the Carnival's itinerary online. It was a basic website with tour dates, and saw they were in Illinois by then. Alex's dad called the main office number listed, asking for Mike. The person on the other end, some administrative assistant, said she'd check and get back to them. She never did. That's when things got weird. Alex's parents drove out to the next stop, a state fair in Wisconsin, about a 5-hour haul from home. They showed up unannounced, talked to Earl the manager face to face. Earl scratched his head, looked through his clipboard of employee lists, and flat out denied Mike had ever worked for them. "Kid, we get a lot of temps," he said, "but no Mike Thompson on the books. You sure you got the right Carnival?" Alex's mom pulled out photos, ones from the fair back home, showing Mike clearly behind the ring toss booth in a Wanderlust Wonders t-shirt. Earl just shrugged, said maybe it was a mix-up, but insisted there were no records, no pay stubs, nothing. Mike's belongings, gone if they ever existed. The crew they talked to either didn't remember him or gave vague answers, like they'd been coached. By this point, Alex was freaking out, and so was I. We spent nights theorizing. Maybe Mike had gotten into a fight and bailed, or hooked up with someone and ditched the job. But that didn't explain the denial. His parents filed a missing persons report with the local police back home, who coordinated with authorities along the Carnival's route. The cops interviewed the Carnival staff again, but it was the same story. No trace of Mike. His name wasn't in their employment database, no social security number on file, nothing. It was like he'd been erased. They hired a private investigator, a no-nonsense guy named Mr. Harlan from Albany who'd worked missing persons cases before. Harlan dug deep, traced bank records, phone pings, even talked to former Carnival workers. Weeks turned into months, and the family was a wreck. Alex stopped hanging out as much. His house felt like a funeral home, with his mom crying over old photos and his dad pacing the kitchen. Finally, after about 3 months, Harlan got a lead. Turns out, Mike's phone had pinged a tower in Chicago, way off the carnival's path. Harlan followed it up, checking hostels and shelters. There he was, Mike, alive and well, crashing on a buddy's couch in the city. The story came out piecemeal. Mike had indeed started with the carnival, but things soured fast. The pay was crap, the hours brutal, and Earl was skimming wages off the books to avoid taxes, hiring folks under the table, no paperwork. Mike got into an argument over unpaid overtime, quit on the spot in Indiana, and hitched a ride to Chicago with a trucker he'd met at a rest stop. He ditched his phone because it was a cheap prepaid that ran out of minutes, and he was too embarrassed to call home right away. Felt like a failure for bailing on his big adventure. Why the denial from the carnival? Simple cover-up. They operated in a gray area, avoiding labor laws and IRS scrutiny by not documenting short-term hires. Admitting Mike worked there could open them up to audits or lawsuits. A few ex-employees Harlan tracked down confirmed it was standard practice. Ghost workers who came and went without a trace. Mike came home eventually, tail between his legs, got a steady job at a local auto shop. He and Alex patched things up, and life moved on. But it taught us all a lesson about how easily someone can slip through the cracks in a system that doesn't want to be accountable. Looking back, it wasn't some sinister mystery, just human messiness, bad decisions, and a shady operation covering its ass. Mike's fine now, married with kids, but he still avoids carnivals like the plague. A few years back, my family and I decided to hit up the annual county fair on a sunny Saturday afternoon. It was one of those classic setups, Ferris wheels creaking in the background, the smell of fried dough and cotton candy everywhere, kids screaming on the rides. I was in my early 20s at the time, home from college for the summer, and I'd volunteered to take my little brother Tommy around while our parents checked out the livestock exhibits. Tommy was 9, all wide-eyed excitement, clutching a handful of tickets we'd bought for the games. We were strolling down the midway, the strip lined with those brightly colored booths where you toss rings or shoot baskets for oversized stuffed animals. Tommy was begging to try the water gun race when I noticed this one booth off to the side, a bit separated from the main row. It looked makeshift, like it had been thrown together last minute. A sagging tent with faded red and yellow stripes, a handwritten sign that just said prizes in marker. No flashy lights or bells like the others. A middle-aged guy was manning it, slouched on a stool, wearing a grubby baseball cap and a stained t-shirt. He had this unkempt beard and eyes that seemed a little too sharp, scanning the crowd. As we passed by, the man leaned over the counter, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Want a free prize? Just come around back." I froze for a second because he wasn't addressing me at all. His gaze was locked right on Tommy, ignoring me completely. Tommy perked up, his face lighting up at the word free. But I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There was something off about the way he said it, like it was a secret just for kids. I tightened my grip on Tommy's hand and stepped in front of him. "No thanks," I said firmly, trying to keep my voice steady. But the guy didn't back down. He leaned even further, that slow, creepy smile spreading across his face, revealing yellowed teeth. "It's a special prize," he murmured, still staring at Tommy. "Just for him." My heart started pounding. I'd heard stories about creeps at fairs preying on kids, and this felt exactly like one of those red flag moments our parents had drilled into us. I yanked Tommy closer and snapped at the man. "Back off. We're not interested." Tommy looked confused, tugging at my arm and whispering, "But it's free." I didn't wait for more. I turned and hustled us away, weaving through the crowd until we were a safe distance. Glancing back, I saw the guy still watching us, that smile unchanged. I wasn't about to let it slide. I spotted a security guard patrolling near the food trucks, a burly guy in a uniform with a radio on his belt. I flagged him down and explained what happened, describing the booth and the man in as much detail as I could. Tommy chimed in with his innocent take, saying the guy promised a prize but seemed weird. The guard nodded seriously, radioed it into his team, and told us to stay put while he checked it out. He asked if we wanted to file a formal report, but since nothing had actually happened beyond the creepy invite, I figured reporting it was enough for now. A few minutes later, the guard came back with another officer in tow. They said the booth was empty when they got there. No sign of the man, and the tent was already being dismantled like it had never been operational. Turns out, it wasn't even an official vendor. Someone had set it up without permission, probably to scam people or worse. The fair organizers got involved, and they reviewed the security footage from nearby cameras. Later that day, my parents and I got a call from the local police. They'd identified the guy from the tapes as a local with a history of minor offenses, including loitering around events with kids. He wasn't arrested right then, but they issued a trespass notice and banned him from the fairgrounds. The police also stepped up patrols for the rest of the weekend, and the organizers sent out an alert to all staff about unauthorized setups. In the end, it shook me up, but it reinforced how important it is to trust your gut. Tommy was fine, though we had a long talk about stranger danger that night over ice cream. The fair wrapped up without any other incidents, and we've been back since, but I always keep a closer eye on things now. It was a warm summer evening back in 2018. One of those nights where the air still hummed with the distant echoes of carnival music, and the smell of fried dough lingered everywhere. My family and I had spent the whole day at the state fair. Me, my wife Sarah, our 2 kids. Emma was 10 and little Max was 6 at the time. And my mom, who we'd convinced to tag along for the rides and the livestock shows. We'd stuffed ourselves with corn dogs, cotton candy, and those giant turkey legs. And the kids had won a couple of stuffed animals from the games. By around 9 p.m., everyone was wiped out, feet sore from wandering the grounds, so we decided to call it a night and head back to the car. The fairgrounds were massive, and the parking lot stretched out like a sea of vehicles under scattered sodium lights that cast long, eerie shadows. It wasn't pitch black, but the farther you got from the main gates, the dimmer it became. Rows upon rows of cars, trucks, and RVs, with only the occasional family trudging back like us. As we approached the exit gates, I realized I'd left my phone charging in the car. Stupid mistake, but I didn't want to risk it dying on the drive home. "You guys wait here near the gates," I told them. "It's well lit, and there are still plenty of people around. I'll jog over, grab it, and be right back. 5 minutes tops." Sarah gave me that worried look she always does when I wander off alone. But Mom nodded and said she'd keep an eye on the kids. They settled on a bench under a bright floodlight, chatting about their favorite parts of the day. I set off into the parking lot, weaving through the cars. It was quieter out there, the fair's noise fading behind me, replaced by the crunch of gravel under my sneakers and the occasional beep of a car alarm in the distance. Our minivan was parked about halfway back in the lot, maybe a quarter-mile walk. The lot was mostly empty now, with people trickling out over outside, but it felt isolated. I was about halfway there when I heard the low rumble of an engine approaching from behind. At first, I didn't think much of it. Cars were coming and going all the time. But then it slowed down, matching my pace, and I glanced over my shoulder. It was a white van. Older model, maybe a Ford Econoline or something similar, with tinted windows and no logos or anything distinctive. It rolled up right beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat from its engine. The driver's side window was already down, and this guy leaned out. He looked middle-aged, scruffy beard, wearing a faded baseball cap pulled low. His voice was casual, almost friendly, but it sent a chill down my spine. "Hey, you lost? You can ride with me if you need a lift." My heart jumped into my throat. I wasn't lost. I was clearly walking with purpose toward the cars, and something about the way he said it just felt off. No one offers a ride to a stranger in a parking lot like that, especially not at night. I didn't stop or respond. Instincts kicked in, and I bolted. I veered toward the nearest row of brighter lights, closer to the fair's perimeter, my feet pounding the ground as I put distance between us. I didn't yell or anything, just ran, glancing back once I felt safer. The van didn't follow. Instead, it accelerated away, tires squealing a bit as it peeled out of the lot, without even circling for a spot. It headed straight for the exit road and vanished into the night. I kept moving until I reached our minivan, grabbed my phone with shaking hands, and hightailed it back to the gates. The whole thing probably lasted less than a minute, but it felt like an eternity. When I got back to my family, I must have looked rattled because Sarah immediately asked what was wrong. I told them the story, trying to play it cool for the kids' sake, but Mom's face went pale. "That sounds like the same van I saw earlier," she said quietly, once the kids were distracted buckling into the car. "When we first got to the gates to wait for you, there was a white van just idling there, engine running, not moving. I thought it was weird. Driver was just sitting there, watching people come and go. But then a security guard walked by, and it pulled away slowly. We drove home in silence mostly, with me checking the rearview mirror more than usual. Nothing else happened that night. We got back safely, tucked the kids in, and I even laughed it off a bit with Sarah over a late-night cup of coffee. But the next day, I called the fairgrounds security office and reported the incident. Just the details, the van's description, and the time. They said they'd note it and keep an eye out, though I doubt much came of it. Looking back, it was probably just some creep trying his luck, maybe hoping to catch someone vulnerable. I'm glad I trusted my gut and ran. These days, we stick together in parking lots, no splitting up. It's a small lesson from a scary moment, but one that's stuck with us.